have done extraordinary things because God used them in an extraordinary way. The woman we're going to look at today is certainly no exception. Personally, this is what we're going to look at today is one of my favorite scenes in Scripture. To me, the whole setting is just fascinating. Before we get into that, though, let me just remind you, we do have dinner tonight after services. I think the Russells and somebody, I don't know who else is doing it. Are you guys doing tonight? Oh no, I guess then it's Kindle is still, or the Pattersons are still. Oh yeah, it's First is theirs. But anyway, it's happening. So plan on being here. Somebody will feed you. And also, I need someone if you would like to do this. Oh, I'm supposed to be doing this right now. In fact. With we're trying this new church teams software that is going to be, it's going to really help us with some attendance, some other record keeping. I need someone, if you would be willing to take attendance in here, just for the class. All you do is you pull up an email, pull up the information on your app or on an app, and then you just kind of punch in the names of people who are here. The names are already on there. If you're interested or willing to do that, come and see me after class, and I'll show you how to do it if I can figure it out. I already got an error. I'll get back to it. It's David here. He's going to be mad at me. Okay, so just if you'd like to do that, if you're willing to do that, come and see me after class, and I'll show you what the deal is. Before we get started, let's have a prayer. Do we have any prayer requests in particular?
Chloe's in Costa Rica doing a trip right now, so with everything kind of going on, traveling, just prayers for safe travel. Good.
Chloe Schlachter's in Costa Rica doing a kind of a humanitarian trip,
It's like a
service project thing through Pepperdine. Interesting concept that she's doing there. That'd be an amazing trip, but yes, you never know.
Mine and Stacy's parents just left today on a cruise for 3 weeks, and so to Hawaii. So just prayers for safety in general, but maybe also for. My dad is very anxious.
Oh yeah.
Starting this virus.
Yeah. Kelly and Stacy's parents traveling to Hawaii. Yes, you even pray for people traveling to Hawaii. Anybody traveling right now, it just seems weird.
Well, our parents are under the weather right now.
Are they?
Yeah, we still are.
Richard and Lori traveled. I have traveled for days and days, but they're home now, but still not feeling well. I get that they are home, right? Yeah. I thought they got home the other day. Not feeling great. Not good. Anything else? Okay, Alex, feel.
About what was going on, and continue to be with us through this day, through this new week. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Okay, so let me ask you first of all, this is something we're not supposed to do or admit to, but who do you avoid? Oh, yeah, he's just going to tell you right now.
Door salespeople.
Door-to-door salesmen. Yes, we avoid those people. Isn't that weird, though? We've noticed that in ourselves in just the last few years. It seemed like a few years ago, the doorbell rang, you're like, hey, somebody's here. Now it's like, don't answer the door. Anybody else? Besides the guy from Texas, which we all know is the right answer. But I mean, there's always that, I said, shouldn't be, but there's that person at work, there's that person at school that, that's a little bit in your face, or what. For me, it's Jared. No, I'm just kidding. But we all have that for whatever reason, there's somebody that you see him coming, you're like, I just can't today, or whatever. And that's not good, and we know that. Because we also know how it feels to be that person. I mean, maybe you do. I do. I mean, you know how does it feel to be avoided or to be ignored? I'm done. It hurts. What I was going to do is I was going to have a couple of you come up here and I was going to tell the class that I was going to use these two people for an illustration, but I was just going to talk to one of them and see what you thought about how would that make you feel about the person who's left alone? You don't care about them at all.
If I had to stand up there, it'd be fine if you left me alone.
I'd much rather you leave me alone. None of us, we don't like it when you say you're at work and you got to go into Bob's office and tell him something important, and and you're going down the hall and he sees you and you see him intentionally go. And it's one of those feelings you kind of go, great, thank you. Nobody likes to be avoided. Nobody likes to be the person who's being ignored. Our situation today, Jesus finds himself, or I would say puts himself, in what is potentially a very awkward situation. He is going to meet up with this woman at the well. And this is a situation where very easily this could, we could have the whole chapter of John 4 not there if Jesus would have done what most people in his situation would have done. If he would have handled the situation like I would have handled the situation, none of this would happen. None of this would be here. There'd be some awkward silence. Eventually the lady would leave and everybody would kind of take a deep sigh, a deep breath, and everybody's fine. Because what happens in this chapter isn't supposed to happen. The way it happens, it's not supposed to happen the way it happens. Jesus had a lot of reasons to avoid this woman and chose not to. John uses 42 verses to tell this woman's story, which is scripturally, especially in New Testament scenarios, 42 verses is very significant. He devotes a lot of time to just this particular instance. And I want you to think while we talk about this, why? Why this time given to this woman? We don't even get a name of this woman. I'll tell you in a little bit. There's for some reason there's an assigned name to her, but this seems like, when you think of the idea of ordinary people, this seems like maybe the most ordinary setting possible for the first century. But in this setting, there are some profound theological lessons, discussions that happen, and just one of those settings where when you kind of pull back and look at it from a 30,000 foot view and kind of see the big picture of it, so much happens here. We learn so much about who Jesus is. So when we look at this setting, first of all, what we find, well, go ahead and open to John chapter 4 and let's just look at it in the text. John chapter 4, the first 8 verses. When Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was making and baptizing more disciples than John, though Jesus himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were, he left Judea and went again to Galilee. Now, if you look in your maps in the back of your Bible, you'll know that he's going from south to north, going from Judea up north to Galilee. Verse 4, he had to travel through Samaria. Seems like an insignificant detail. We'll come back to that. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the property that Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, worn out from his journey, sat down at the well. It was about noon. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. "Give me a drink," Jesus said to her, because his disciples had gone into town to buy food. Let's just stop right there for now. So what we find, first of all, is this woman comes to the well alone. She comes by herself to draw water. You've probably heard this discussed before. What is significant about this whole, just those first initial details? She's by herself, and it's noon. What's significant about that? She doesn't come with a husband, for one thing. That's something we can learn.
She wouldn't be drawing water at the heat of the day.
Normally, the women would gather, and don't hear this sexist, this is just how it happened. The women would get the water pots first thing in the morning while it's still cool, and go get water out of the well. The well water is going to be cold. I mean, it's going to be cold all the time in this well. We'll talk about that in a minute. But they would draw the water, and it was kind of a society, not society, social, yeah, that's the word. A social type thing. They'd get together, they'd kind of hang around and talk. Everybody's taking the turn getting their well water. She comes middle of the day on her own. That tells us, it's almost like John is giving us little hints about this lady as we get into this discussion with her, or about her. The apostles are gone. So this is one of the few times we find Jesus alone, unless he's off praying somewhere. This is one of the only times we find him just off by himself, not devoting this time to prayer. So there's all sorts of intentionality on Jesus' part here. He doesn't have a rope. He doesn't have the utensils. What would normally happen is, as you see the well here, I don't know what I'm about to do. Yeah, you see the well here. When we think of wells, you usually think of the little thing above it with the rope and the bucket going. That's not normally how it would work here. You would bring your own rope and your own bucket. So Jesus is sitting there. He's got no tools. I mean, he has nothing to get water. So he's sitting there waiting for someone to come along. The well, as John points out, and this is significant, this is in fact Jacob's well. This is Jacob's well. This is this well today. This is one of those things that to me would be so incredibly fascinating to see. Because this is historically, this is almost for certain the right place. That Jesus probably sat right on, that's probably been not exactly those blocks, but Jesus was right there. That to me is just bizarre. But this is in a church building now called the Church of Saint Photina. This is the name that the Greek Orthodox Church through history has assigned to this woman, Photina. I don't know. The Russian word is Svetlana. So apparently that's her name. Somehow they came up with, that was the lady's name. But this is the Church of Saint Photina. And as you see here now, there is this with the well and all that normal stuff that we'd expect to see. This is the well. Turn over to Genesis chapter 33, and we'll see some of this in detail. Genesis chapter 33, verse 18. This is after Jacob has meeting Esau. This is kind of late in his life, or getting near the end of his life, I guess. He's getting older. After Jacob, verse 18, came from Padan Aram, he arrives safely at Shechem in the land of Canaan and camped in front of the city. He purchased a section of the field where he had pitched his tent from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of silver. And he set up an altar there and called it God, the God of Israel. So this property, this area, is the first property owned in the Promised Land by an Israelite. This is the first purchase. Now, Abraham, in Genesis chapter 23, we see Abraham buys a plot of land to be for Sarah and for himself to be buried in a cave in Machpelah or wherever it is. But this is where Jacob lived. And I get this is the Bible nerd in me. That to me is just so cool. Jacob lived right there. I mean, not in that church building, but to me, that's just fascinating. This well is still today a cold well. It's an incredibly deep well. It is very good water in an area surrounded by bad water, which is another thing that's fascinating. In Jewish lore, Jewish legend over the years, it became kind of holy ground, and there's whole story about that it wasn't that great of water until Jacob bought it, and then God blessed him and then cursed all the water around it, so because this is the best water. But none of that's in the Bible, so we don't buy that. But this is an incredibly significant area to whom? To what group of people? The Jews. And now it's in Samaritan territory. And that in and of itself lends some significance to this whole scene. Because this is an incredibly Jewish area. Jesus is about to talk to this woman about an incredibly Jewish concept. But they're at this place that has been taken over, I guess, by the Samaritans. So, let's take a brief interlude here and let's talk about the Samaritans. What Jesus does here, and we'll talk about some more of this in a little bit more detail, but the fact that he is even here is unusual, if not scandalous even. When you think about this area, now think about what how John phrased it, that Jesus was in Judea and he needed to go to Galilee. And the text says what about going through Samaria? He had to. Now you and I go, well, yeah, you have to go through Samaria. To get from here to here, you have to go through here. Not if you're a Jew. You didn't do it. What the Jews would do is they would go right through here and they would cross the Jordan River and they would travel up through Decapolis. There's some crossings just north of Ephraim. There's other places through here. But they would go through Decapolis. I said the same way twice. But they would do everything they could to avoid going through Samaria. What do you know about Samaria? Oh, besides what you just saw.
Part of the northern kingdom.
It was at one point part of, the north. In fact, what used to be right here? The capital of the northern kingdom was right here. Judea was down here, Israel was up here. In 728, 722, when the Assyrians took off the northern kingdom, what the Assyrians would do, what many other cultures would do, but they would leave some native peoples. They would say, you stay here, take care of this place. This is our place now. We're going to take almost all of you, but you people stay here, take care of the farms, because we're going to come back here once in a while. We're going to take some stuff. So they left people here. Now, over time, the years and years and years that they were away and all the different things that happened, then 586, the southern kingdom was taken off by the Babylonians. The northern kingdoms never came back. I mean, that's one of those things you probably heard most of your life in Bible classes or sermons or whatever. But that to me is that's a fascinating study. That the northern kingdoms were supposedly the stronger kingdoms, the larger kingdom. They get taken off into captivity and they never come back. They're the lost tribes, if you will. But back to where we are, in that time when the Jews are all taken away, the people that are left there are like, we got to find husbands and wives, and we got to continue to be people. So in this area right here is Sychar. This is where the well is. The people intermarry with all sorts. I mean, along here you've got all sorts of different religions. You've got all sorts of different belief systems all over the place. Even in that time from the end of the Old Testament to the beginning of the New Testament, there's all sorts of different religion going on there. So the people that are left here, they intermarry. And what happens is the Samaritans become their own culture. I mean, I think we kind of, or I guess maybe I tend to think of the Samaritans as kind of this, they're not sure who they are, even in Jesus' day. We're not sure if we're Jews, but that's not the case. They're Samaritans. They are their own people.
But just to be clear, geographically, it's a region and a city.
Yeah, this region is the Samarian region, but Samaria itself it's like New York, kind of. Samaria.
Samaria city.
Yeah, but it's this region. I'm not exactly sure what the border is, but Nazareth isn't in Samaria, so it's somewhere, it's just kind of that area in general. But there's a great deal of extra biblical history about this whole stuff, which is, again, to me is pretty fascinating. That there's history that we've found, not we, myself, but archaeologists, historians have found in other cultures that totally support what the Bible says about all of this stuff. I mean, it's unreal. In Nehemiah, we find several details. I totally skipped a verse in this well. Let me back up to the well here at Sychar. This is also where Joseph's bones are buried. Joshua 24, verse 32. This is the people of Israel, once they came out of Egypt after Joseph died, they carried his bones around until they could bury them there at his father's well. So I mean, enormously significant place. Back to these people. In Nehemiah, we find that Sanballat, the governor of Samaria, who is a Samaritan, he's not an Assyrian assigned guy. Some people say he's probably of Assyrian descent because he's risen to that rank. But he takes one of his daughters, marries the grandson, I may have that backwards, but marries into the high priesthood of the Jewish high priesthood. And Nehemiah, at the end of Nehemiah, says, I hate him for that. I hate that was even allowed.
I have a question regarding Joseph's bones and stuff. Whenever they say that, do they mean was he dead for a while before they started carrying him somewhere, or was it just like his body?
Well, when he died, they would have wrapped him like they wrap. I mean, like basically mummified him.
Joseph was involved.
Yeah, but then eventually it would become just bones.
It was like 400 years after.
Yeah, it was years. It was a long time. So it became bones.
But he was involved. Well.
Yeah. It depends on how well the embalming went. I guess there was a big package of stuff. They went. Let's just leave it at that.
Probably in a box of some.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's go with the box. Okay, so the result of this intermarriage and all of that, what would that do to these people who were Jewish by origin? What would that do to their religious practices, would you think? Corrupt them? Lead them toward what? Idolatry. The nemesis of the Jewish people throughout the Old Testament, and that's what became of the Samaritans. Now, the Samaritans practiced this very, what's the word, syncretistic, where they tried to kind of blend some Judaism, some paganism, and they had a belief in God. I mean, as we see in the text, they had a temple there on Mount Gerizim. They regarded the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, the Torah, the Pentateuch, whatever you want to call it. They regarded that as Scripture, but they didn't think they didn't take any of the rest of it. Now, why would they disregard the history, the law, or the history and the prophets and the poetry books? Why do you think they would discount that as Scripture?
Because then if they were to regard that as scripture, then it would constantly remind them of what they're doing is wrong.
Yeah, it would be a reminder to what they were doing is wrong. It would be a reminder of their real origin. You go through 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, you're going to see, oh yeah, the people right here where we live is where all the Jews live, and they got carried away, and then, oh yeah, we forgot to be Jews. They're fine connecting back to Abraham. They're fine connecting back to that because that's kind of a more generic history, it seems. But when it comes to the details about them, they say, no, we don't want any of that. So there is that understanding of who they are originally, at least. So let's get back to Jesus. John 4 verse 4 says that Jesus needed to go through Samaria. Well, let me get back to the map here. Jesus didn't do this route. It says he needed to go through here. It wasn't because he was in a hurry. We have to be clear on that. Every Jew of his day would have taken this route. He needed to go through there because there was something else he needed to do. Everything that we see here, and again, I don't want to beat this to death, but it's so important to see what's happening here. Everything about this setting, culturally for Jesus, is wrong. What do you know about what's wrong about what happens here? You tell me. What do you know? He's a man, she's a woman. First and foremost. Really, I mean, and that doesn't matter if she's, red, yellow, black, or white. It doesn't matter her nationality. Men didn't talk to women in public unless it was your wife. What else? She's a Samaritan. There is that nationality difference. The Jews looked at Samaritans as less than human. I mean, they looked at them as despicable people. I mean, probably worse than Gentiles. Because the Gentiles, they're just stupid. They just didn't know who God was. The Samaritans had known and blew it.
Her lifestyle is not the best. The women are, she's not even with the other women.
Her lifestyle. Even the other, she knows, okay, I'm making an assumption here. She either knows better than to try and go with the other women, or the other women have told her or have made it clear, don't hang out with us. We know who you are. For some reason, she comes by herself.
Well, to a Jew, whatever she gives to him is unclean.
Whatever she gives to him is unclean. Jesus asks her for a drink out of her thing, which is one of those little minutia points. But that in and of itself, if you probably heard me say before, there are many places in Scripture that we tend to read through going, and Jesus looked at the woman and said, give me a drink. And the woman said, we don't get, if you're one of the first readers of this, you know this culture, you read Jesus says, give me a drink, you go, he said, what? Because he would not ask this woman for a drink of anything from her. That's unclean. He'd have to purify himself for 7 days because he touched something that was unclean. But he goes, give me a drink. And luckily the apostles weren't there because they'd have freaked out, because you know how they are. I mean, they'd have went, no, stop it. They'd have done something crazy. But so he asks her for a drink. And when he says this, even the language there, it's not, hey, could you give me a drink, please? He just says, give me a drink. It's not a request. He's not asking a question. He's saying, give me a drink. Which she doesn't apparently seem to see that as rude. She just she's like, well, you don't have, well, let's look at the text here. Let me go back to that. Look at somebody read verses 9 through 12, please.
Blake's got it.
Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock?
Okay, so he makes this request command for water. She's surprised. And she's surprised for a lot of different reasons. I mean, like we've talked about some of these cultural things. She's surprised by this for a lot of different reasons. He skips over all those taboos. Skips over all the unclean, all the everything, and says, give me a drink. She's a little bit shocked by this. But he directs the conversation toward living water. What did they think living water was? When they would have heard just the expression living water. Water that moves. They're talking about moving water. But she's even kind of keeping up. She goes, well, wait a minute. You don't have a bucket. You don't have anything to get water. Why do you ask me for it? Jesus is kind of steering the conversation here a little bit. And she says, you're going to get water. Are you greater even than Jacob? So she kind of leads him into this. And what he's going to do is say, yeah, in fact, I am. And he's about to just blow this whole thing open. And then he says, verse 16 and 17, he says, verse 15, she says, give me this water. Verse 16, he says, go call your husband and come back here. So now it gets interesting. Because now he's gone from conversation to he's stepping on toes. What is her response? I don't have a husband. Is she lying? What could Jesus do right here? Let's just say you're Jesus. You know this woman's situation. I mean, we see all through John, Jesus knows man. Jesus knows what people are thinking. He says, go get your husband. She goes, I don't have a husband. What could he have said? Couldn't he have jumped down her throat? I know your situation. Yeah, you're right, you don't have a husband. In fact, and yes, he goes into this stuff, but right at first, and I think this is a great principle for us, he doesn't jump all over her. He knows the full extent of everything she's doing. He knows everything about her. He knows that she's got this living situation, but he finds something good to say. Because he says, you're right when you say you don't have a husband. Thanks for, you were honest. So, I mean, he gives her that little prop. And again, considering the whole social dynamic, even him saying that is like picking her up and giving her a big hug. Because, I mean, he's saying, yeah, thank you. That was the right answer. But let's delve a little deeper. Nathan?
It's probably off topic, but I found it very interesting. Jesus and his disciples said go around to all the Jewish places, and then afterward, this happens. And so this is probably what the first situation where Jesus is actually kind of giving the gospel, so to speak, to someone other than a Jew.
A non-Jew, yeah.
Is that probably the first example of that in the situation? Well, probably first.
I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I have to think about that. There's this.
Like the centurion, he's healed people.
Yeah.
Like the first where he's saying, I am the Christ.
Oh, yeah. In fact, we'll get to that in just a minute. What he's saying, what Nathan's saying is that, is this the first time he's revealed who he is to a non-Jew? We'll get to that in just a second. Now, he says, yeah, you're right, you don't have a husband. And then he says the whole story. He says, in fact, you've had 5 husbands. The guy you're living with right now isn't your husband, right? And what's her answer? She says, sir, I perceive what? What do you make of that response? I mean, like I said, to me, it's really easy to read these as just black and white words on a page. Think about the situation. Does she confirm what he says? I mean, not really. She just goes, wow, you're a prophet, huh? I mean, you just kind of see her going, sir, I perceive that you're a prophet. I mean, it's a huge statement she makes. Because what does she tell the people in verses 29 and 39, I think, 27, 37, 29, 30? What did she tell the people that Jesus told her? Everything I've ever done. Did he? No, he didn't. He didn't. Well, I remember when you were 7, you did. I remember when you were 14, this thing. He knew one thing, but she knew. She took that to say, he knows everything about me. So she, fast forward, she goes and tells the 10, he told me everything I've ever done. They're like, how long were you there? I mean, when did the guy get there? Yesterday?
So, I mean, if you read into it further, you can almost make the assumption that maybe the other people living around there didn't know her situation, because if it was common knowledge, then she could really just pass him off as, oh, he's somebody that's involved in the gossip. You know what I mean? Because everybody talks about it, so he must have just heard what I've done.
Yeah.
She says, well, he knows something about me that maybe nobody else knows.
Yeah. I mean, what Brad's saying is you could almost think that maybe she thinks that maybe he's just heard this somewhere, except he's a stranger and she knows he's a Jew. So, because she says, how is it that you were a Jew? So she's like, why are you doing here? So I think she knows he's from somewhere else, that he shouldn't know what he knows. So she makes an attempt, it seems like, and maybe this is me reading into this, but it seems like she tries to kind of steer the conversation a little bit. Let's not talk about my whole marriage situation. She then asks the question, the Jews say we should worship at Jerusalem. We say we should worship at Mount Gerizim. What's the answer? Now, like I said, there's all kinds of scholarly debate on this. Is she just dodging her situation? Or does she go, I perceive that you're a prophet, and the biggest question we have as Samaritans is, are we right or are they right? So, like I said, I've always kind of thought that she's dodging what he's saying, but if you think about it, maybe she's going, this may be my one chance to get this answered. This has been plaguing us as a people for centuries. If this guy's who he seems to be somebody, maybe he can answer the question. So he asks her, and Jesus gives this great answer that we're pretty familiar with in verses 21 through 24. Jesus told her, believe me, woman, an hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you don't know. We worship what we do know, because salvation is from the Jews. But an hour is coming, and in fact now is here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Yes, the Father wants such people to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and in truth. So, in this setting, Jesus answers some questions for her. He goes, where you worship doesn't matter. I don't care if it's Gerizim or Jerusalem. He does say, you guys worship what you don't even know. So what he also does is he totally says, he takes down the whole Samaritan argument like that. I can't snap with this hand. So he says, what you're doing is wrong, but he says, but you know what? It's not going to matter. And what he does now with this whole discussion is he turns this whole thing back to who he is. Because what he's saying when he says a time is coming and now is, he's saying we're in a new era now. He doesn't use the word, but he says we're in a new dispensation. He goes, now it's time for the messianic age is about to happen. So he's telling her an incredible amount of theology in about 5 sentences. But she seems to get it. Because she says, I know the Messiah is coming. And then Jesus says, the one you're talking to, it's me. Now, that in and of itself is astounding. This is Jesus's, up until the night he is betrayed, until the night he's in the trial and all that, this is his most direct pronouncement of him being the Messiah in Scripture. Not to the Jews, not to everybody. I mean, he tells the apostles who he is, and then he says, don't tell anybody this. Remember, let's keep this low for a while. But he tells this woman at the well, who is, all sorts of cultural taboos, he tells her straight up, I'm him. Why her? Why here?
Well, John answers the question later in the scripture where he says that, can't you see the harvest is plentiful? So they're ready.
Well, yeah, because they're ready, and that's what is incredibly significant about this. There's this barrier between the Jews and the Samaritans, Jews and Gentiles, and that's much more understood, it seems like. But between the Jews and the Samaritans, there's this animosity. We will never have any dealings with them. And Jesus just kicked that door down. I mean, just totally obliterated that whole idea. This is a testimony of her faith that we don't even see yet. Because what does she do? Let's fast forward to the end of this. What does she do? She leaves her water pot. That's one of those other significant things that I think we kind of breeze over. You have to have that. She knows full well she's coming back. She didn't just leave it because she forgot. She left it because she's going to come back. She's going to get the crowds that she's avoided for most of her adult life. And could you imagine that scene when this woman who is this social taboo comes in the middle of town and goes, "Hey, everybody, come here, come here." They're like, she didn't even talk to us. I mean, we don't talk to her. She goes to the people that she's avoided and brings them to Jesus. So let's make some applications as we close out here. Think about the Pharisees. What was the Pharisees' one of the main complaints about who Jesus spent time with? What? He's a friend of sinners. He hangs out with the bad people. He's a son of Beelzebub. He's a winebibber and a glutton. He's all these different things because of the people that he reaches out to and spends time with. What he shows with this woman is the overcoming of so many obstacles. Jesus didn't care what she looked like, didn't care what her background was, didn't even jump down her throat when he knew what she was doing was wrong. He coaxed her through that and changed her. She is an incredible transformation after this happened. The woman who avoided the people goes and gets the people. And then, as Nathan was saying, she gets all the people, and that great speech or whatever Jesus says, the fields are white unto harvest. When he says that, he's looking and he's seeing these people probably wearing shades of white walking up the road. And he goes, look what she did. She went and got these people. The Pharisees didn't accept Jesus because he didn't match the picture of the Messiah that they had. We tend to do that. We kind of try and fit Jesus into our little box. The Samaritans were like, we just know there's a Messiah. And this guy, she says, he told me everything I ever did. And they come and say, and they beg him to stay. And we see the belief of a whole town because of one woman who nobody else would talk to. I mean, there's so many lessons for us there. That guy in the first slide or that lady in the first that you avoid at work, that's one person at the well. That person at school, that person in your family that is like, I have to deal. Jesus said sometimes you deal with those people because you never know what will happen. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to say that Jesus says in the midst of that conversation that he goes, salvation comes from the Jews. You worship what you don't know, but Jews worship what they do know. It's almost like afterwards when Jesus talking to the Pharisees and disciples, he's basically saying like, guys, you have the truth. You need to share it.
Exactly.
That's what I'm doing right now because they don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know, and they're not going to know. So maybe you can apply that today, saying salvation comes from Christians, essentially.
Yeah, what he does even with the apostles is letting them know nobody's off limits anymore. And like I said, that is, to me, is one of the most significant lessons of this whole setting. Okay, we'll pick up with somebody else next week.